He entered an Apache shelter to escape the storm, and found the chief's daughter waiting. Jake Weston was no stranger to the harsh, unforgiving world of the frontier. His life had been spent on the move, always running from something, sometimes from the past, other times from enemies who couldn't understand why he refused to settle. A man of few words and even fewer friends, Jake was used to solitude. The dry, endless plains of this desert planet were as much his home as the small cabin he had built back in the town of Lost Creek. But tonight, there was no shelter from the storm. A cold wind howled through the canyons as Jake's boots kicked up the swirling dust that filled the air. The crimson sun had long since disappeared behind the horizon, leaving behind a blackened sky that seemed to stretch on forever. His throat burned from the dry air, and his lips cracked under the pressure of the wind. Every step felt like a battle, but Jake didn't stop. He couldn't. The only thing he knew was to keep moving forward. As the storm grew fiercer, Jake knew he had to find shelter. His small hovercraft, a relic of older tech, had long since given out on him, leaving him stranded on foot in the middle of nowhere. He had been tracking the movements of some dangerous people, a gang of outlaws that had been terrorizing the planet, but now, with the storm upon him, all thoughts of them were pushed aside. His only concern was survival. Through the thick dust and heavy winds, Jake spotted something in the distance, something that didn't belong. At first, it looked like just another rock formation, but as he drew closer, the structure began to take shape. It was a shelter, an old Apache-style dwelling built into the side of the canyon. The stone walls, weathered by centuries of sandstorms and sun, stood strong against the storm's rage. The sight gave Jake a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He moved toward it quickly, his heart pounding in his chest as he pushed through the wind. Each step brought him closer to the shelter, and he could see the faint flicker of firelight from within. He didn't know who lived there, but he didn't care. If there were people, they would offer him refuge. If not, he could at least find a place to wait out the storm. By the time he reached the entrance, his clothes were soaked with sand, and his face felt raw from the abrasive wind. He reached out and pushed open the heavy wooden door. It creaked as it swung inward, revealing a small interior lit by the soft glow of a fire. The warmth hit Jake like a wave, and he couldn't help but sigh in relief. Inside, sitting on a rug near the fire, was a woman. Her posture was relaxed, almost regal, her back straight and her hands folded calmly in her lap. She didn't look up when Jake entered, as if she had been expecting him all along. She was dressed in traditional Apache clothing, the deep red and brown hues blending with the surroundings. The long braid of her dark hair fell over her shoulder, and her sharp, intelligent eyes remained focused on the fire. Jake paused, taking a moment to assess the situation. His hand instinctively reached for the holster on his side, but there was no threat here. At least, not yet. The woman didn't appear surprised to see him, nor did she seem worried. Instead, she simply raised an eyebrow and spoke in a voice that was calm and clear. "You've been walking a long way, cowboy." "You're safe here," she said. Jake didn't answer right away. He was too stunned by the strange calmness in her voice. In a world where danger lurked around every corner, where every step could be a step toward death, he wasn't used to hearing words like that, words that offered comfort rather than threat. "Safe?" he finally muttered, still unsure whether to step forward or retreat. "I'm not so sure about that." The woman smiled slightly, as if she had heard that response 100 times before. "The storm outside is fierce. There's no way you would have made it through without help." "Who are you?" "I'm Ayana," she replied simply, "daughter of Chief Chemo. This shelter belongs to my people." Jake took a cautious step closer, still wary but intrigued. The name Chief Chemo meant something on this planet, something powerful. Ayana wasn't just any woman. She was part of a long-standing tradition, the leader's daughter, a protector of their people. "I wasn't expecting company," Jake said, trying to break the tension. Ayana chuckled softly. "Nor was I expecting you, but fate has a funny way of guiding people to where they're needed most." Jake wasn't sure what she meant, but he wasn't in the mood for philosophical talk. He needed rest, water, and a warm fire to chase away the chill of the desert night. The storm still raged outside, the sound of howling wind and crashing sand filling the air. He had no choice but to stay. "I won't be a burden," Jake said, stepping further into the shelter. "I just need a place to rest until the storm passes." "You are welcome to stay as long as you need," Ayana replied, her tone unshaken. "The storm may pass soon, but it will always return. The desert never lets anyone truly escape." Jake nodded, though he didn't fully understand what she meant. "I've been running from a lot of things," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Ayana's gaze softened, and she stood up, moving to the small fire pit. The desert is a place for people to come to terms with their past, but no one can run forever. There was no point in arguing. The desert had a way of swallowing people whole, leaving them lost in its endless sands. But for the moment, all he could think about was the warmth of the fire, the peace of the shelter, and the strange woman who seemed to know more about him than he was willing to admit. As he sat down by the fire, Ayana handed him a cup filled with warm tea, its aroma filling the air. She didn't speak again, and neither did he. The storm outside began to fade, but Jake knew this was only a temporary respite. There were dangers ahead. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. But for now, there was only the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the Apache chief's daughter. And in that moment, Jake allowed himself to relax just for a little while before the storm of his past came crashing back. As the fire crackled softly in the shelter, the wind outside began to die down, though the storm had not completely passed. The heavy gusts had given way to a gentle breeze, pushing the clouds away and allowing the faint glow of stars to peek through the gaps in the rocky canyon walls. For a moment, Jake let his mind wander, but the silence of the shelter made it hard to ignore the feeling that something was about to change. Ayana sat across from him, her calm presence a stark contrast to the storm outside. She had been silent for a while, watching the fire dance as the last of the storm's fury faded away. Jake took a long sip from the cup she had given him, the warm tea soothing his parched throat. The taste was unlike anything he had ever had, rich, herbal, and comforting. "Thank you," Jake said, setting the empty cup down beside him. "I needed that." "You've traveled far," she said. "What brings you to this part of the world?" He hadn't intended to tell anyone about his past, not to her, not to anyone. But something about the quiet strength in her gaze made him feel like he could trust her. He leaned back, his gaze drifting to the ceiling of the shelter, before answering. "I've been running for a long time," Jake began, his voice low and rough. "There are people I've crossed paths with, dangerous people, outlaws. They don't take kindly to me walking away from their business." Ayana didn't speak, but her eyes never left him. She didn't push him to say more. She simply waited, patient and calm. Jake continued, his thoughts coming slowly as if he hadn't spoken them out loud in years. "I used to be part of a gang, a small one. We did things, bad things, but I didn't want to anymore. Couldn't stand it, so I left. They didn't like that. They didn't like people leaving the life." Jake paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. He hadn't spoken about it in so long. He hadn't needed to. The desert had been his escape, the miles between him and his past a wall that protected him from the ghosts of who he used to be. "I've been on the run ever since," he said, almost whispering. "I'm not proud of what I did. I don't expect anyone to forgive me for it." Ayana's gaze softened as she listened. She didn't judge him, not with her eyes, not with her words. There was something about her that made him feel like he wasn't the worst person in the world, like there was still room for him to change. "There is no need for forgiveness, Jake Weston," Ayana said quietly, her voice smooth like the cool breeze outside. "People make choices. Some good, some bad. But it is what you do now that matters." Jake looked at her, surprised by the kindness in her voice. He had expected pity or judgment, but instead she spoke with understanding, as if she knew exactly what he was going through. "I'm not so sure," Jake muttered, rubbing his hand over his face. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I've done." Ayana didn't say anything for a moment, and then she stood, her movements fluid and graceful. She walked to the far corner of the shelter and returned with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She placed it carefully on the ground in front of Jake. "It is not about making up for the past," she said, kneeling beside him. "It is about living in the present, about finding peace in your actions now, not in what you've done before." Jake frowned, uncertain. But Ayana simply gestured for him to open the bundle. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small pouch filled with dried herbs. "These herbs," Ayana explained, "are used by my people to help calm the mind and heal the soul. They are not a cure for everything, but they may help you find a moment of peace, just for now." Jake stared at the herbs for a long moment. He had always relied on his own strength, his own instincts, but something about Ayana's quiet offer made him pause. He took the pouch from her, feeling its weight in his hands. "Thank you," he said quietly, not sure how else to respond. Ayana smiled, standing back up. "Rest for now. The storm may pass, but your journey is just beginning. You will need your strength." Jake didn't argue. He settled back down by the fire, the warmth of the flames soothing his tired body. Ayana returned to her place across from him, and for a while neither of them spoke. There was no need. The silence between them felt natural, peaceful, as if the world outside had faded away completely. The fire crackled, the sound of the flames filling the space between them. Jake's eyelids grew heavy as the exhaustion from his long journey began to catch up with him. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth and the quiet embrace him. But then, just as sleep began to claim him, a sound outside the shelter caught his attention. It was soft at first, just the faintest rustling of footsteps, but it was enough to make his hand instinctively reach for the holster at his side. Ayana noticed the movement, her gaze flicking to the door of the shelter. Her expression didn't change, but Jake could see the alertness in her eyes. She stood quietly walking toward the entrance with the grace of someone who had lived her entire life in the wilderness. "Stay here," she said softly, her voice a command wrapped in kindness. Jake didn't argue. He watched as Ayana stepped outside, her figure disappearing into the night. He couldn't see her clearly in the dark, but the way she moved suggested that she wasn't afraid of whatever or whoever was out there. She had the confidence of someone who had faced danger before and come out on top. Jake waited in silence, his hand still on the gun at his side, his eyes scanning the door. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that something wasn't right. But Ayana's calm presence had a way of quieting his fears, just for a moment. A few minutes passed, and then Ayana returned, her expression unchanged. She didn't say anything, just nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. Jake relaxed slightly, though the unease in his stomach didn't fade entirely. There was something going on out there, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. But for now, he was here, safe in the shelter. He glanced at Ayana, who was already returning to her place by the fire, her movements as fluid and graceful as ever. Her presence was calming, and despite the storm outside, Jake felt a small sense of peace settle in his chest. He closed his eyes again, the firelight dancing behind his lids. The past would always be with him, but for the first time in a long while he allowed himself to relax, just for a moment. The dawn broke slowly, the first light of morning cutting through the shadows of the canyon. The wind had died down completely, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Jake woke to the quiet crackling of the fire, the warmth of it still filling the small shelter. His body ached from the long walk and the weight of the memories he carried with him, but for the first time in days he felt like he could breathe a little easier. Ayana had already risen, her figure moving gracefully as she stirred the fire and prepared something to eat. She didn't speak, but there was a quiet purpose to everything she did, as if every action had meaning. Jake sat up slowly, his muscles protesting, but he didn't mind. He had nowhere else to be, and for now that felt like a small comfort. "I hope you're hungry," Ayana said, her voice breaking the silence. "The storm has passed, but you will need strength for what's ahead." Jake nodded, his stomach growling in agreement. "I'm always hungry." Ayana smiled faintly as she handed him a bowl of stew. It was simple but hearty. Roots, beans, and some dried meat. Nothing fancy, but it was exactly what he needed. He took a bite, the warmth of the food filling him with a sense of relief. As he ate, Ayana spoke. "I've lived here all my life," she began, her eyes distant as she gazed into the fire. "My people have always called this canyon home. We are a small group, but we are strong. We've survived the storms, the raids, the loss. But even now, there is danger. There are those who would seek to destroy what we've built." Jake paused, looking up at her. There was something in her voice, a quiet strength, but also something else. Something he couldn't quite place. "What kind of danger?" Ayana's gaze flickered toward the door, then back to the fire. "Outlaws, like the ones you've been running from. They've come before, and they will come again. They think they can take whatever they want, but they are wrong.
My father
We will not be taken without a fight." Jake's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his gun. The mention of outlaws brought his thoughts back to his own past. He had left that life behind, but it seemed like it was never far away. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that trouble was coming. It wasn't just the outlaws that worried him. There was something about this place, something about Ayana's words, that made him feel like he was being pulled into something much bigger than just his own escape. Before he could say anything, a sound outside caught his attention. It was faint at first, just the rustle of footsteps in the sand, but Jake's training kicked in. He reached for his gun, his muscles tensing. Ayana stood quickly, her face expressionless. She moved toward the entrance without hesitation. "Stay here," she said firmly, her voice no longer calm but commanding. "I'll see who it is." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but she was already gone. slipping outside with a quiet grace that made him feel like he had no right to stop her. He watched through the cracks in the door, his heart racing as he waited for something to happen. The minutes dragged on, and the tension in the air thickened. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It had been too quiet for too long. The outlaws were close, he could feel it. He waited, his hand resting on his gun, his eyes never leaving the door. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ayanna returned, her movements calm as ever, but Jake could see the change in her eyes. There was something new there, something he couldn't ignore.
"It's them," she said quietly, standing just inside the doorway.
"They found us." Jake stood up quickly, his heart pounding. "Who?" "The outlaws," Ayanna said. "They've come looking for you." Jake's stomach twisted. He had known this moment would come, but it still didn't feel real. He had been running from these people for so long, and now they were here, standing on the doorstep of the one place he had found peace. Ayanna's expression softened as she watched him, her eyes full of understanding. "They won't stop until they find you. They think you have something they want, and they won't care who they hurt to get it." Jake clenched his fists, the weight of her words sinking in. "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered, his voice low and rough. Ayanna nodded. "None of us ask for the storms in our lives. But we must face them when they come." Jake stood silent for a moment, then made a decision. "Not this time. Not when there were people depending on him." "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's face them." Ayanna didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "You are not alone, Jake Weston. We will face them together." The two of them moved quickly, preparing for the confrontation that was coming. Ayanna gathered a few weapons, handing one to Jake. It was a simple rifle, but it felt right in his hands. He had used guns like this before, but this time, it wasn't just about survival. This time, he was fighting for something more. As they stepped outside, the air was thick with tension. The shelter stood in a small clearing at the edge of the canyon, and beyond it, Jake could see the shadows of figures moving toward them. The outlaws had arrived. Their horses kicked up the dust as they rode, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. Jake's heart beat faster, but he kept his focus. He wasn't going to let them take anything from Ayanna or her people. Ayanna stood beside him, calm and unflinching. She had the look of someone who had faced danger many times before, and Jake could see that she wasn't afraid. She had learned to stand her ground. The leader of the outlaws, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, dismounted and walked toward them. He sneered when he saw Jake. "You think you can hide from us, Weston?" the man growled. "We've been looking for you." Jake stepped forward, his hand steady on the rifle. "I'm not hiding," he said coldly. "I'm done running." The outlaw leader laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Jake's nerves. "You think you can take us all on? You're outnumbered, cowboy. You're alone." "I'm not alone." Ayanna stepped forward, standing tall beside him, her eyes unwavering. "And you will leave this place in peace, or we will make you." The outlaw leader's eyes flickered to her, and for a brief moment Jake saw hesitation in his gaze, but it was only for a second. The man raised his hand, signaling to his men. Jake's grip tightened on his rifle. It was about to begin. The outlaw leader's voice echoed in the still morning air as he motioned for his men to surround the shelter. The tension between them was thick, and Jake could feel it in every muscle of his body. He had been in situations like this before, but never like this. This time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something more, about standing up for something that mattered, for people who mattered. Ayanna stood beside him, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. She hadn't wavered. She wasn't afraid. Jake could see the strength in her, a strength that came from years of defending her people, her land, her way of life. It was that strength that gave him courage, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The outlaw leader, his face twisted with a sneer, stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Jake. "You think you can stop us, Weston?" he spat. "You're outnumbered. You're a fool to stand against us." Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The leader's words were empty. Actions spoke louder than words, and right now it was time to act. Ayanna's voice cut through the tension. "You will leave this place, and you will leave now. We won't let you harm these people." The outlaw leader's eyes flickered to her, sizing her up. He seemed to pause for a moment, considering her words, but then his lip curled into a grin. "You think we'll just walk away? This land doesn't belong to you. We'll take what we want, and you can't stop us." Jake stepped forward, his boots crunching in the sand. His voice was steady, his eyes hard. "You'll take nothing from here." Without another word, the first outlaw charged, pulling his rifle from his back and aiming it at Jake. The sound of gunfire split the air, but Jake was ready. He ducked to the side, feeling the bullet whiz past him, missing by inches. He returned fire, his shot true. The outlaw fell, a sharp cry escaping his lips before he hit the ground. The remaining outlaws hesitated for a moment, but that hesitation was all Jake needed. He fired again, knocking another man off his horse. Ayana's movements were swift and precise as she took down two more with her bow. She moved like the wind, graceful but deadly. Her aim was perfect, each arrow finding its target with unerring accuracy. Jake and Ayana fought as one, their movements fluid and synchronized. They were a team, each protecting the other, each covering the other's back. It was the first time in years Jake had felt this kind of trust with someone, and it was the first time in a long while he felt like he wasn't just fighting for his own survival. The outlaw leader, seeing his men fall one by one, seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation. His eyes flared with anger, and he reached for his own rifle, aiming directly at Jake. "Stay down!" Ayana shouted, her voice sharp. Jake didn't have time to react. Ayana was already moving, pulling her own gun and shooting the outlaw leader in the shoulder. He staggered back, dropping his rifle as he tried to regain his balance. Jake took advantage of the moment. He moved quickly, his instincts guiding him, and in one swift motion he knocked the outlaw leader to the ground, pinning him beneath his weight. The leader struggled beneath him, but Jake held him down, keeping him in place. "You've lost," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "It's over." The outlaw leader growled in frustration, but knew he couldn't win. He looked around at his fallen men, the realization that he had been defeated sinking in. His hands trembled, but there was no escape. "We're not finished," the leader muttered under his breath, his voice filled with venom. "You'll regret this." Jake looked him dead in the eye, his expression unyielding. "Not today." Ayana stepped forward, her bow still in her hand. She approached the leader with calm steps, her eyes filled with cold resolve. "You will leave now, and you will never return. If you do, there will be no mercy." The leader glanced at his remaining men, then at the others who lay injured or dead on the ground. With a final defeated look, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll go. But remember this, you're not safe." Jake stood up, releasing his grip on the leader. He didn't respond. The man's words meant nothing. The only thing that mattered now was that the threat had been neutralized, and Ayana and her people were safe. Ayana turned to Jake, her gaze steady. "You fought well. I knew you had it in you." Jake nodded, feeling a sense of pride in her words. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about standing together. It was about finding trust in each other and defending what mattered most. "We fought well," he said, his voice quieter now, but filled with meaning. "Together." Decades smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Jake's chest tighten. Yes, together. The outlaws retreated, their horses kicking up dust as they disappeared into the distance. For now the threat was gone, but Jake knew better than to think this was the end. There would always be more outlaws, more dangers on the horizon. The desert was a place of constant change, but in that moment Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jake and Ayana stood side by side, looking out over the canyon. The storm had passed, but the future was still uncertain. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, Jake didn't feel alone. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing firm, and he had found something worth fighting for. "Ayana," Jake said, turning to her, "I've spent my life running, trying to escape who I was. But today, I found something worth staying for." Ayana's gaze softened, and she nodded. "We all have a past, but it doesn't define us. What matters is who we are now, and what we choose to do with the future." Jake looked at her, and for the first time he truly understood. He wasn't just fighting for his own redemption. He was fighting for something bigger, something he hadn't even realized he was searching for. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they would face whatever came next.